Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over a tactic that everyone needs to have in their repertoire. It is the concept of attraction, trying to attract your opponent's pieces to a particular square so you can have a strong attack. Now, usually you're going to be sacrificing a material to attract your opponent's king or their queen to a specific square. So we're going to go over some examples so you have an idea of what that looks like. It's white's move. And white, if you look at some of the opportunities that they have, one of those is to play knight to d7. Now, when they play knight to d7, you can see that the knight is attacking the b6 square and the f8 square. So this is forking the queen and this f8 square. Unfortunately, black's king is not on f8. It is on g8. So in a best case scenario, if we could attract the king to the f8 square, we would have the opportunity to play knight to d7. So we need to be looking for ways to get our opponent to move to the square we want them to attract them to that square. Luckily, we have the move rook to f8. You can see that black does not have any other option except for the king to take here on f8. So while white is sacrificing material, this move should allow them to gain material or gain an advantage in the game, and that's exactly what this does. White sacrifices a rook, and they're able to play knight to d7, check, forking the king and the queen. After the king moves, probably to e7, centralizing as much as possible, white can take on b6, capture the queen, and should have a pretty easy endgame. Let's look at another example with a similar concept, and then we'll look at some more advanced variations to make sure that we can drill in the concepts we're looking at. So it's black's move, and see if you can find the best move for attraction. Now the move in this particular spot is rook to h1. Similar to the previous position we looked at, black would really like to play knight takes on g3. Attacking the queen on h5, but the king is on h2. Right now, the king could just take on g3 and everything's fine, but really, black would be in a better position if the king were on h1. And so, black can sacrifice the rook and attract the king from h2 down to h1 and take that rook. Now, white doesn't have to take the rook. They could play an even worse move and just come to g2 and not even take the rook, and then they're just down even more material. But they're essentially forced and attracted to the h1 square by the rook. And now black can come in, take on g3 with fork, and then after the king moves, they can capture this queen on h5. Now, white does have the rook, but white cannot capture this knight on g3, because this rook is pinned down by the queen on c6. So in this spot, while it does look like they can recapture, they're actually in a fork and they're going to lose their queen. So that's the second example. Let's look at some more advanced variations. Let's look at another example. And first we have to analyze the position and see what threats white has and where black can go from here. Now, if you look at white's bishop, it's blocking off these two squares right here for the king. Then if you look at this square on c5, that's blocked off by the pawn on d4. So see if you can find a way that white can attract black to a specific square and then use that for an advantage. Now, hopefully you were able to find the move queen takes on d5. Now, we already looked at the bishop taking off these squares. The queen also takes off the b7 square, and the c5 square was already blocked off by the pawn on d4. So the king is essentially forced and is attracted to the d5 square. And now white has mate in 1 with bishop to e4. Let's go ahead and take a look at another example. One of the most satisfying uses of attraction comes in the smothered mate. It's white's move. You can tell they're down quite a bit in material, but they have the move queen to g8. Now, in this case, we're not trying to attract the king to g8. That would be an illegal move because that square is actually defended or attacked by the knight on h6. Instead, we're attracting the rook on f8 to come to g8. That's the only legal move that black has. So we're attracting the rook to g8, but now that opens up the door for knight to f7, and this is checkmate. We attracted the rook to g8 and forced black to trap their own king on h8, which allows us to play smothered mate with knight to f7. So let's look at one more example to make sure everyone understands truly how to identify attraction in their own games. The last example we're going to look at, it's white's move, so take a minute and see if you can find the best option. Now white should play rook takes on g7. We're attracting the king to g7. Black's in a world of hurt regardless of how they play, but if they don't take on g7, because they're not always forced to go to the square you're attracting them to, but usually they're in an even worse off position if they don't. Because if they just go f8, well, then they lose to checkmate. If they come to h8, then they lose to checkmate here on h7. So we're attracting them to the g7 square, but then white has rook to f7, check, and is defended by the bishop on c4. And after they move, it doesn't matter if they come to h8 or g8. Both of those options are going to be followed up by queen to h7. So this is attracting, getting your opponent to move to squares where you want them to. So when you're analyzing your own games, try to think about the best case. If my opponent had pieces on particular squares, what that would do for you in your position, and then see if you can actually force them to go to those squares. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys in the next one.